in 1928. Now, you can see from the pictures that they're abnormal looking. There's 300 of these skulls that were found buried together, and they all have these abnormal heads. And
so my first reaction when I saw this was, oh, but there are some cultures where this is considered beautiful, and cultures actually elongate their skulls.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit about why that is not the explanation for this.
Well, this is what they're finding. First of all, in regards to that, the capacity inside the skull is larger than a normal human skull. So if they were to do that, what you're talking about, it would reshape the skull, but it wouldn't change the volume of the brain inside the skull. These are 25% larger and 60% heavier. That much.
Ooh, 60%.
Yeah,
it's a huge difference.
And that alone is enough to make you go, "Well, what's going on there?" But the DNA evidence that came out, to put this in perspective, these skulls are 3,000 years old, and the pyramids of Egypt are around 4,000 years old. And what they came out with was this: the researcher who is named Brian Forster, he hired a DNA geneticist to look into this, who said this: it had mitochondrial DNA with mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. But a few fragments I was able to sequence from this sample indicate that if these mutations will hold, we are dealing with a new human-like creature, very distant from the Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. I am not sure it will even fit into the known evolutionary tree. So this is incomplete. It's not an entire. He's saying that the samples that he's gotten, there's this indication that yes, there's some human-like DNA that they cannot connect to previously known DNA. And of course, a lot of people, skeptics, are going to criticize the actual test or the methods of the test or the
which they should.
Sure, yes, but even the part about the volume of the brain and the weight of it is enough to make me lean in the direction of like, okay, there might be something there.
Even visually, I mean, these things look photoshopped. They're so unlike any human skulls. Like so incredibly long.
Yeah, and there's the 300 of them, the entire population of this area. Yeah, this isn't compared with a normal human skull. And as you said, the skull modification that certain cultures do, some suggest that it is to emulate this older civilization because they were superior in a way. So the elite would try to make themselves look that way. That's what's being supposed. I'm not saying I believe that, so don't go flaming me down in the comments, all right? Forster says this: from the doctors that I have spoken to, they have said that you can alter the shape of the skull, but you cannot increase the size of the skull. The skull is genetically predetermined to have a certain volume. And he's saying, he needs more money to do a full genetic genome study, which would cost about $100,000. So he's trying to raise the money to do that, look for an angel investor. Until then, he says, I've had many different ideas, but I've been waiting for actual DNA analysis, and this has taken an incredible long time, mainly due to lack of funding. But he says his intent is simply to find the truth as to who these people were. I find it fascinating.
Absolutely.
I want to know. So I hope we find out more.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. I'll be bringing Ron Moorhead on. Most of you remember him from the Sierra Sounds. Here's a little clip of the Sierra Sounds. and that's the Sierra Sounds. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, visit sasquatchchronicles.com, become a subscriber, get additional shows throughout the week. Again, I'm still fighting this cold, so please forgive my voice tonight. I wanted to invite Ron back to the show. Ron and I are pretty good friends. He's one of those guys I can always call up and shoot ideas off of him. You know, when I've had a strange encounter, or I've talked to a witness that, I'm really not sure what to make of it. Ron's been doing this for way longer than I have. And it's nice to have people, that you can call. And Ron's one of those guys. He always picks up when I call and I'll say, hey, Ron, what do you think of this? Or what's your take on this? And, he always gives me his honest feedback on what he thinks. And sometimes, while we may not always agree on certain things, on our theories, at the end of the day, I think we both, understand that we could be wrong on a lot of things. And I always respect Ron, always respect him as a person, respect his thoughts, his views. And this is a perfect example of, while you may not agree sometimes with someone, you can definitely respect them. And so, again, Ron's a close friend. I'm glad he came on. I wanted to talk a little bit about, go a little bit off trail tonight and talk about these Paracas skulls. We'll be talking about Bigfoot tonight too as well, but I really wanted to get his take on the Paracas skulls. And as some of you heard in the intro, what the Paracas skulls are, Ron had a chance to go down to Peru and actually look at them firsthand and talk to people locally about what these skulls are and how they came about. Always wanted to do a show on this, and so I'm very happy to have Ron on tonight. Well, let's go ahead and welcome Ron to the show. Ron is the author of Voices in the Wilderness, also known for the Bigfoot recordings, a.k.a. the Sierra Sounds. Ron is always kind enough to allow me to use his sounds. I do a lot of retelling of historical Sasquatch encounters, and so I do appreciate you letting me use those, Ron. Ron also has a new book coming out this fall. It's called The Quantum Bigfoot. You can visit his website at ronmorehead.com, and I highly recommend everyone to go to the website, check it out, check out his research, and if you get a chance, get these Sierra Sounds, the Bigfoot Sounds, Volume 1 and 2. Ron, thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you, Wes, for asking me. It's my pleasure. I just love talking to you. It's good to sit here and just talk, Yeah, actually, the information on my new book, which I haven't really put on my website yet, it's on my Facebook, Ronald J. Morehead on Facebook. Anyway, I haven't said much about it other than just announced it the other day. So thank you for mentioning it, though.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll have to have you back when it comes out. I'm always interested in your theories and your take. I know you've been doing this for a long time. As I was just saying before we went on air, I'm jealous of your trip to Peru. I've always been interested in the Paracas skulls for a long time. Tell me about your interest in the Paracas skulls. How did that come about?
Well, I talked to a guy named L.A. Mazula who invited me to go down there with him on a expedition. He heard about the sounds. He's into the Nephilim, the biblical giants of old, and that was a cross between aliens and humans. According to the biblical scriptures, anyway, and he's into trying to establish that scientifically, and if it can be established. So anyway, I wondered sometimes if maybe the enigmas associated with Bigfoot up here wouldn't have something to do with the enigmas that you see down there and all the interesting things. So I went down there with him in 2013. We was down there, I think, 3 weeks, maybe something like that, and maybe 4. And I went down again in 2014. And went into Bolivia then, too, and we visited the Paracas skulls again. And anyway, I got an exact copy of them from a guy named Joe Taylor who went down with us, and they allowed him to actually copy one. He's a forensic paleontologist, I guess you call him, and came out really well. So they're quite unique, and love to talk about them. They're not human, I can tell you that. We had scientists with us, 2 different scientists on each trip, and we weighed them. We got into a private museum because you can't do much of that in the public museums. They won't let you touch them or even look at some of them. So anyway, what can I tell you about them? They're elongated. If you've seen pictures of them, they were not cradle boarded, as they call it. Cranial deformation is a proper word. And that's when the Incas were copying these, the pre-Inca people, the Paracas people, we call them. And they were cradle boarding their royalty to try to get the same shape that these non-human skulls were. And they was doing that, we believe, to maybe get the same attributes they may have had, which was, we think, responsible for the megalithic structures down there, which were moved, 100-ton boulders were moved for miles and miles and miles up on top of a hill and cut like a jigsaw puzzle with some type of a method that's unknown today even. Anyway, placed together like a jigsaw puzzle. No mortar, just perfectly matched. And some of the walls we've seen in some of the other areas, they were 5 foot thick and just as matched just as well on the other side of the wall. So what did that, how they did it is a mystery.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at these elongated skulls, and they're found all over the world. It's not just Peru. They find them in Egypt. You know, I think the Incas and the Mayans tried copying them. Kind of like, I guess, what you would think of kids today copying celebrities.
Yeah, they did copy them. We know they were not human because of the forensic we did on the skulls themselves. They have a sagittal, humans have a sagittal suture through the top of their head in the parietal area. We have two parietal bones on top of our head. You have the occipital in the front and the cranial in the front and the occipital in the back. These do not have a sagittal suture. It's just one skull, one parietal, and that makes them kind of unique. And in the back of a lot of them, there was two little pinholes, which we don't know what was for, but they're unique, and they weren't from deformation or for trepidation, I should say, which is what a lot of ancients did when they had a headache. They'd knock a hole in their head to try to relieve the pain.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I looked into this a while back, what I found was even on some of these skulls, it looked like brain surgery had been done on some of these skulls. They have, you mentioned the two holes, but I know some of the other ones I looked at, they had brain surgery. It looked like they had done brain surgery on them, which is shocking.
Absolutely, yeah. You can see it. And you can see where it's tried to heal up on some of them. And but these holes in the back of these skulls, just two pinholes, pretty much in the same spot on several different ones. And they're just pinholes. They're not like something punched them with a knife. It's like they were there naturally. And don't know what that was all about, but these things certainly, we think, had some features about them that could make things happen that we don't know how. They had the secret of levitation or vibrational waves or something, because they had to get those boulders there by some means other than what we know.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you mentioned that, because as you look around the world, a lot of these old structures, we can't even duplicate today with the equipment we have and all the technology we have. We can't move these boulders. I think it's interesting when you look at these skulls. I know the first thing a lot of people will say, as you had mentioned, Ron, it's cranial deformation. But these particular skulls, especially the ones in Peru, they're a lot larger. The brain was a lot larger. I think they were 60% heavier than a normal human skull. You can alter a skull to copy this, but you can't make a skull physically larger. You can't add volume to a skull.
Or the brain. That's what they were after. Yeah, if they elongated the skull, it might have made it look like that, but it wouldn't have given them any more brain matter. And that's what I think they were after, is trying to figure out what it took to get the same features these things had, to be able to do what these things probably did. So anyway, kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. When you look at them, my first thought when I very first saw them is I was thinking, that looks like a gray alien skull, because even the eyes are bigger. Mm-hmm. Everything's bigger about these skulls. When you were down there, did they talk about the physical size of these people? I mean, were these people just physically larger, or is there a theory on that?
No, they weren't physically larger. They were probably 5 to 6 feet, and just like us. But even the tombs, we were in some graves that, well, we're not supposed to do that, but we did it, and found some remains. And no, their femurs, everything was about the same as a regular man. So now there has been reports of giants being found down there and giant bones being found. We didn't find any. The Huacaros, that's the grave robbers that took us to a couple spots, they told me through an interpreter that they found an 8-foot tall one once, but they don't think a lot of, they're after the artifacts there. They're after the jewelry, they're after whatever gets them money that they can sell to a private museum. And I tell you what, they're all over down there. And in fact, in Ecuador in 2013, I just read this article recently, they found, I think it was 7 or 8 bodies of giants, 7 to 8 foot tall. And evidently they did turn them over to the Germans, who were supposed to be doing some forensic study, but I've lost trail of it there. I haven't heard a thing about it, and it's been a couple of years now. So they ought to be coming out with something on that. But they found those in Ecuador just above Peru.
I'm always amazed, too, when these giant skulls and these giant skeletons just up and disappear. You know, as you go through the historical record, isn't it shocking that they just disappear?
Well, they don't really disappear. The government takes them, I think, and they just hide them. And I don't know why. I think there's a conspiracy, to be honest with you. I've been into Winnemucca at the Lovelock Caves 4 times, and I've been into the museum over there. I've been trying to research that, and they'll tell you, oh, they weren't giants, but you see one of the old pictures of that was taken of the giants. I guess you've heard that story, haven't you, about the Paiutes that warred with cannibalistic giants in Nevada?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of people know about that story. The Paiutes swore up and down they were hairy, they were big, they were cannibals, and they ran as many as they could into this cave and burned them out, basically, and shot them as they came out with arrows. Anyway, it wasn't until 1911 when they discovered these remains, when guana miners were taking the bat guana out. They came under about 4 or 5 feet underneath the bat guana was these remains of artifacts, and of course the Paiutes moved in there after they killed the giants out, but really the skulls they found were much bigger than humans, and I saw pictures of them, and it's just I wanted to research Peru because I wanted to see if those elongation, because a lot of people report sagittal crests, sagittal features, elongated features on Bigfoot. And I thought maybe that might have something to do with what's happening up here, because there are stories in the Incas where they warred with the Central America Aztec, and the Aztec actually have stories, and Mayans do too, of warring with giants in the north. Well, there you got it, going right into North America. So those stories, I think, it chases down into North America, and then you can also, about the minaret skull. I'm sure you've heard about that. That got strangely lost by UCLA. It's gone. Al Berry and I went in on an expedition to try to find that. It was a large skull. Have you heard about that skull, Wes?
I haven't. Tell me about it.
Well, Dr. Denton, from Bishop, Nevada, went with a Boy Scout group into the minarets in the Sierras. And they had a mule with them, and a pack mule, and it kicked up some bones, or a bone, a skull, basically, and it was huge. And Dr. Denton looked at it. He sent it off to UCLA to have it studied, and that's where it's lost. The report they got back was that it's probably some Native American. It was, what do they call it? I forgot now the term, but where the skull is just bigger. But it was something that shouldn't have got lost, whatever it was, and it should have gotten probably some professor's desk somewhere for an ashtray. Who knows? But all those things seem to get taken away. They go through this act that was passed in 1998 that says that we can't view human remains. And those are supposed to be human remains. That's why they've taken all the giants away. Only a Paiute or a Native American can claim them and give them a rightful burial, but then they got to bury them if they claim them. So anyway, all that stuff gets lost. I don't know if you know Jim Barrera or not, but I know him. He's spoken. I think he's got a TV thing going on too, but he's got all kinds of information on giants in North America that have been found, and they just all get taken away into the Smithsonian, locked up, never seen again. And I think the government has got to keep a lid on all this, because it's going to throw a kink into, I think this is why they do it, into religions. It'll throw a kink into Darwinism, because it's just something different. And what I've chased down is what I think is different about them. And that's that I do believe that Bigfoot is a hybrid. He's a cross between something and something else. Basically, some type of a primate. And possibly there's been some alien intervention into DNA manipulation in the past somewhere that's created these things. Because they are sentient. As most people know by now, that the sounds that I've recorded has language in them, according to cryptolinguist, Scott Nelson, studied them. And he's a professional. He does this. He's did it for 30 years. He's got thousands of hours listening to voice transcriptions and making voice transcriptions. But he's declared that they have language by the human definition of language. Now, a lot of things can talk back and forth, like whales communicate, dolphins communicate, all animals communicate, but to use cognizant language like these things do, only humans are supposed to have that. And that makes them into another realm as far as I'm concerned, because I think we're hybrids, to be honest with you.
Well, and talking about the language, I tend to agree with you. I mean, even the insider I had on recently, Chris was talking about how they do have a language. It's more than just whoops, grunts, and moans. They do talk back and forth together. It is definitely a language. And it's interesting as you talk about the giants and stuff. I've done a few shows on this, and when you look at it like what the Native Americans talk about regarding cannibalistic giants and some of the old tales that they tell, I think sometimes I've done this personally. We lump everything into Bigfoot. They may not necessarily be talking about Bigfoot. Some of these other things, whether it was a Nephilim or whatever they were fighting giants back then, and they talked about them eating people and just being vicious, vicious. And there definitely is some sort of cover-up. I tend to agree with you on that. Do you think that's why anthropologists aren't looking into, say, for example, the Paracas skulls? I mean, this is one of the biggest discoveries of our time, and no one really seems to be looking into it.
Well, they can't get funding. I tell you, I've talked to scientists. I know them. I know a lot of these guys. I talk with them in meets. I've been around the world with a couple of them, or not around the world, but over into some pretty foreign places. But they will not, if they even approach something like this, they will not get funded, and it can affect their career. Because it's a cartoonish type sound, Bigfoot. It doesn't sound like something you would pay attention to. But for some reason, they lose their funding if they attack this. Now, we've been very fortunate with Dr. Meldrum and Benenegel and a few others who have tried and worked towards this, but they got to be careful. They got to stay within the classical scientific box that where they can get funding to work on things. But to get some of these guys to pay attention to this is like nailing Jello to the wall. They just don't, and it's because of their training and their tenure, everything about their education is on the line, and their future. So until somebody like Brian Forrester, who's down there and trying to bring this to light, he was our guide down there. He's got a lot going on with all over discovering this stuff, and until someone really breaks out and says, "I don't care what happens, I'm going to put a finger on this," and they do some studies, because we're trying to get DNA out of some of it, but you can't get it out of Peru. Now, the Germans did, those ones I told you about earlier, the giants that they found in Ecuador. We'll see if they come up with something there, but then it gets kind of just put on the back burner, just like so much does. Even, Melba Ketchum's gotten a bad rap, I think, but I think her study may turn out to be more than what people think of now. She's a geneticist, that did the DNA on supposedly Bigfoot findings. So, but what she came up with is right where my theory goes and where it's been. And it's kind of interesting where the the genome basically is different, and it's got a human mitochondrial DNA, which we have. All humans have that, obviously, but the nuclear DNA, the male counterpart to all this, is unknown. We can chase ours down. Anyway, she did all that and said that, well, there's no known species that it came from, the male counterpart. And that kind of throws a curve into science, because that doesn't fall into evolution, it doesn't fall into Darwinism, it doesn't fall into categories that they've got to put something in.
Yeah, it makes you wonder where, talking about Bigfoot, where it comes from. I had my insider, and I spent a lot of time talking with that person. And one of the things that Chris had mentioned was they are definitely doing DNA manipulation on these things and creating other things. And it's not too far off to believe that that's going on, because you can see all of the transhumanism going on today, all of just a different manipulation, people trying to live longer, people trying to be above human, I guess. And you see a lot of that going on today. But going back to what Chris was saying, they have altered these beings. And so I always wonder, if someone gets DNA from a Sasquatch that has been manipulated with, what would they see? What would they, is it the original ones that were here, or is it's just this big mystery, And so even Chris said if someone ran the DNA off of one that had been manipulated with, it would make no sense when the geneticist ran it, because there would be things that wouldn't add up.
You're leading right into what I believe. I believe there's more than one type of these beings out there. Some are good, some are bad. But some have been manipulated through DNA, and I think some of them are from a long time, remnants from a long time back. They could have crossbred with natives, which made them a little more human than what some of the others might be. But I believe the government may be involved with some type of DNA manipulation. They've always played around with stuff like that, as long as they've had the technology anyway. And it's not a far-fetched thing to think if aliens have been here, and I'm sure they have been from what I've seen, that they haven't done some manipulation with the DNA too of primates of some type, and all kinds of animals according to Greek mythology. So it's kind of fun looking into all this, it really is, Wes, because it's a mystery, and it's fun to try to solve those mysteries, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's a blast to look into some of the stuff, and some of it's kind of terrifying when you look into it. It makes you, for me, and I don't know if you feel this way, Ron, for me, when I start looking into some of the stuff, like the Paracas skulls and these elongated skulls and these giants and Sasquatch, it makes me think our human history isn't quite what we've been told. The history of mankind is completely different than what you'll find in a textbook in a college somewhere. Even like the Paracas skulls. I know in Austria there was a woman that died that had a form of cranial deformation, and I think she died like 400 AD. And even in the Middle Ages, Royal Europeans were copying what you find in the Paracas skulls, and it's like, why are they copying this? As you looked into it, who do you think these people were with regard to the Paracas skulls?
I think they were alien. Basically, they're not human, whatever they were. How they got here, I don't know for sure, because nobody does. But there's a lot of enigmas down there. You've got the Nazca area. There's mountains down there that the whole top of it's missing. I mean, it hadn't been graded off. It's just gone. And I flew over all that. And it's just, the stuff you see down there is just like the cradle bore of the world or something. When you see a graveyard, I went through a graveyard, I went partially anyway, it was 7 miles long, this grave site. And all you've seen, for as far as you could see, is a mound and a little hole, a mound and a hole. That's where the Wacaros, the grave robbers, are digging up looking for artifacts. And where they find the really good artifacts is in the royalty graveyards. And those are sealed off now because they were getting robbed so much. They're guarded. In fact, we went to where we could just see one, and a guard came up and said, "You can't even take a picture of it," which was really strange. And we had a guide with us, too, from a local museum, and he, anyway, almost got us all arrested. But that regardless, they protect that stuff now, the government does, in all these areas for some reason. And I really don't know why they are so stingy with that, because we could learn so much if we took some DNA, but I don't think they want us to know so much.
Are the Paracas skulls, are they open to the public for display?
Yeah, they're in private museums mostly. Down in Paracas, they call them Paracas skulls because that's where they're mostly seen. You can see them pretty much everywhere, though, over Peru and Bolivia, too. I saw a really big one in Bolivia from a private guy who found it in his yard, buried. He was actually close to Pumapuku up there, close to Lake Titicaca, and he's digging for a foundation for his home and found out he was basically living close to a graveyard, right there on a graveyard, so he stopped putting his house there. But anyway, there's a big skull there, just elongated, just like these others. It was bigger. You do have a museum in Lima, actually. Not Lima, excuse me. I forgot the name of the town now, but it's south of Paracas, southeast of Paracas. But you can get in there and look at them, but they're behind glass, and they're elongated, but you can't study them. You get in these private museums, and he'll let you pick them up and look at them, and that's what we went into in Paracas. And we got to weigh them. We got to take them apart. Actually, there was a baby there, a mummified one, that was taken out of a tomb with two others, and we think it was a mother, father, and a baby. And this baby we brought a forensic dentist in to give us an assessment of what he thought the age was. He thought it was between 14 and 18 months old. And I've got a copy of that one, too. And it's just not human. There's no parietal, there's no sagittal suture in the parietal. It's just one single parietal on top of the head. And the occipital in the back is just strangely different.
Are they all red-headed?
Well, I don't know. The ones we saw were red-headed, yeah. The baby was red-headed, for sure. And that was after we unwrapped it, very gingerly unwrapped it in front of a scientist with gloves on. Everything was done properly because we was documenting it all. And it was red hair growing on that thing. And some of the others we saw in the museum, a lot of them didn't have any hair. They clean them off. And but the ones that did have some hair were red, yes.
Yeah, it just, the whole thing fascinates me. You know, it's who were these people, or who were these beings, I guess I should say, and why is everyone around the world trying to copy this elongated skull? What was it about these beings that even royalty, like in the Middle Ages I mentioned, even royalty was trying to copy this elongated look? And it just makes you wonder, who were these beings? I mean, what was it about them? You know, because you would think you'd see someone with an elongated skull today, and they'd be a freak in our culture.
Well, to me, what I think is they're trying to copy what these things were able to do. You get into even the Egyptian pyramids, you know, it's still a little bit of a mystery. I think they got it figured out, but none of that stuff makes sense. You'd have to plant one of those 200-ton boulders every 60 seconds or something like that to build it in one pharaoh's lifetime. There's some ridiculous equation for that just doesn't add up. Somebody knew something, and it was genius is what it was. And these things are, if you've seen those megalithic structures down there all over Peru, and there's a lot of them up in Cusco, they're all over. And also you've got the Machu Picchu, which basically I think the Incas actually moved on to that and did some things there after these Paracas people were gone. So we don't really know everything, obviously, but they were trying to mimic the abilities that these things have by elongating their own skulls, or the skulls of their royalty.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even the Nazca lines, I think there's a famous one, they call it the astronaut. It's got big eyes, and I think I could have sworn that they say the Paracas people actually created that.
Well, I don't know who created it. I don't know that they know, but it's been there a long time. And the eyes on these skulls, the sockets anyway, are huge. They're much bigger than, and so is the mandible. They're just different than human. I'm looking at one right now on my desk here, and a little creepy.
Yeah, they are.
But they're able to do things, and I think things that we don't know how to do. And basically it's levitation. It's probably through vibrational waves. we don't know, but we can only guess and speculate on what it was all about. But again, it's fun. I want to see how it came to Bigfoot, if it did relate to Bigfoot. So basically, I followed the stories that they have all the way up here to North America, and there's a possibility that Bigfoot could be part of something that was a remnant of something that was from these things, or from something else. Don't tell us how many, Wes, how many different aliens have been on this earth, different types, different kinds. A few years ago, you got laughed out for talking like we're talking now, but I don't care. I don't think that's the truth. I think if we're kind of naive to think that there's maybe only one type of alien out there that came to the earth. I think there's probably different types, and they've probably all got much more technology than we have at this point. And they probably dinked around with different animals, including humans and primates and all kinds of things. So I think there's more than one kind of a Bigfoot out there.
You know, it's not necessarily crazy talk. I think people thought that Bigfoot was crazy talk until 10, 15, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now today it's becoming more and more accepted. But, you know, you're right. You look back at even what the Sumerians said, and they describe even different beings that came to this planet. And, you know, it's not too far off when you go back and you look at, like you said, the megalithical structures. You go look at historically the stuff that's still on Earth and how we can't replicate it today. It's not too far off to think we had some sort of help, or there was someone that came down and did something. And it just blows me away because it seems like it's being so covered up. Everything's being so covered up. You talk about giants and people think you're crazy. Until you really start looking into some of this stuff and you really start researching it, you realize it's really not that crazy. It's not too far off of some of these theories people have. I wanted to switch gears with you and ask you, I had kind of a strange thing happen to me probably a month or so ago, or a little bit more. You know, I always thought that people that saw the orbs were crazy. I don't know why I felt that way. I don't want to say crazy, I just had never seen anything like that, and people talked about them. And then I saw it, and we made the mistake of chasing it. And I want to warn people out there, don't chase them because they might chase you back. But when you were up and doing the Sierra Sounds and up in that area, have you ever come across anything like that? Have you ever seen anything like that?
Personally, I didn't see orbs. The other guys did. They had these balls of light actually following them around there at night, the Johnson brothers, and they talked to Bill and I, who we went back up later on, and we didn't see, those balls didn't come around, but we've seen lights, and I don't know that I would call it an orb, but it was definitely round, but it was huge. It was more like a UFO, and there's been other things happen up there at our camp. But an orb, I think, is out of our light scope. It kind of, our eyes don't pick them up. Where a camera's light will, a flash from a camera. And I've experienced that at Joe Hauser's Montana Vortex. I was up there visiting him here a while back and actually took pictures of them and blew them up, and you can see a definition inside of the orbs. It's like there's a reason for them. They're not just a ball of light or something. They're basically something going on in those things. Looks like, anyway. And one I looked at was like a Mayan calendar or something. It's so intricate. I think orbs may be a pilot ship of some type from a UFO, maybe, who is trying to look around, because they are everywhere. You just don't see them with your eyes, but your camera light will probably pick them up. Maybe
orb was the wrong definition I used. I guess ball of light, because we actually did see it with the naked eye. It caught our attention, and I got it on camera. Yeah. It threw us off. It scared us. Well, I don't want to say scared us. I was fascinated by it. We decided to give chase, and then they kind of decided, I guess, to chase us back, it's a really weird, I'm even nervous talking about it, but it was just odd for me because it wasn't just aimlessly flying around. They were like being controlled, or they had a sense, you know?
Yeah, they do. I think that's my guess anyway, what they are. I think they're just like a pilot camera, sort of like a drone that we might have, you know, that maybe aliens can look and see what a lot of people are doing at the same time. but they're all over, these things. At least I've heard. I used to think like you did about orbs. I didn't give much until I witnessed these up at Joe Hauser's Montana Vortex. That was just amazing. And plus, there's been Bigfoot activity up there, so something going on. And the only thing we can see is what's in our vibrational frequency of light, and that's from 0 to 186,000 miles a second. And after that, matter doesn't exist anymore. It's only energy and turns into a vibration. So I'm writing about that now in my new book, Quantum Bigfoot. I got into Einstein, I got into all these things and quantum physics, and I think this has got something to do with how these things because you hear reports of these things disappearing. And I got to think there's a science behind that unless these people are crazy, and I just can't believe I've been doing this for, 40 some odd years now, and I hear these. I used to just shove those people aside when I hear them talk about they saw one disappear, but I don't do that. I don't throw anybody aside when they tell me any of these strange things where there's orbs are disappearing or whatever, because nothing's going to surprise me in this field anymore. Nothing. It's just a weird world out there, and we live in a three-dimensional world where there's a lot more dimensions, and when you get above the speed of light, you can get into those other dimensions, but you can't see them with your naked eye.
Well, and I always wanted to ask you about that, because I'm kind of like you now, Ron. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing for me.
That's a scary thing, Wes. That's a scary thing.
But, I tend to be more open and more willing to listen to. I've heard some crazy, crazy stuff, what people would consider crazy. Everything from aliens to, I could tell you all sorts of things. But one thing that, with regard to the Sasquatch disappearing, I always think, and this is my theory on it, and you could tell me, obviously I could be wrong, you could tell me your thoughts on it. But, you hear so many reports of Sasquatch doing very mundane things. I can give you several examples. Like, I had a hunter one time that he saw a Sasquatch pick up a rock, bang it against a tree, and put its ear against a tree and listen. And it did it a few times, and then it knocked the tree over, and there was a possum inside this dead tree. It yanked the possum out, smashed it against the tree, and then ate it. But you hear them do very mundane types of things, and then sometimes you get these really off reports, these really odd reports of it just vanished, it just disappeared. And I'll ask people, well, did it drop down to all fours? Tell me what you mean by it just disappeared. Sometimes they'll say it just vanished. It was in an open field and it just vanished. And I always wonder if people are seeing a true flesh and blood Sasquatch, or if they're running into something demonic. Demons are known as tricksters. Demons are known for, you read the Bible, it tells you all sorts of things to watch out for with demons. And so when I look at that, I always wonder, did they see a Sasquatch or did they see something else? Have you looked into that? Have you thought about that?
Oh, yeah, a lot, because I've heard this stuff, same stuff you have, and different stories, and going forever with it, but I don't know. I think there's good ones and there's bad ones. The only way demonic something can get into a bodily form is if that bodily form allows it, because it's a spirit otherwise. It's caught up in another dimension. Basically, I think when these things, if they can disappear, they've learned how to change their vibrational frequency. And if you can learn or know the vibrational frequency of anything, you can move it or change it. And I think that's the secret to Christ's miracles, too. Your thoughts can go faster than light. And once you go faster than light, anything, things change. And if you can learn the vibrational frequency of anything, I think you can make it happen. You can change it. You can make things alter with it. And these things, somehow, and I'm still looking into all this, have learned, I think, how to, at least some of them, how to change their vibrational frequencies so they're out of our light range. And that may sound a little bit strange, but that's what I'm thinking, because you talk about people who see a spaceship, too, or a UFO, all of a sudden just shoots away so fast and it's just out of sight. Well, did it really go out of sight or just go out of their sight? It went out of their sight, obviously. But we just see what's in our light range. Without light, you wouldn't see anything. You think about it.
Yeah, even a blade of grass has a certain frequency it vibrates at. So you're right. It's interesting. I'm a student of the quantum physics, and I love that topic too as well. And I guess I'm into a lot of different things. So I'd be interested in reading your book. When's your book come out?
I hope it comes out this fall. That's what I'm working. I've been working on that this winter while I'm not out in the field. But let me give you something I just pulled up on a PowerPoint program. I'm speaking in Kennewick, Washington here next weekend. It's the weekend of the 4th, the 5th, at Tom Cantrell's event. And I'll be presenting this PowerPoint program there, but I get in more. I change this about every year or so, or sometimes twice a year, my program. As I learn things or think I've learned things, I put them in my program, offer this as an idea for people. But Einstein said everything is energy. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy. This is physics. Albert Einstein. And that's kind of interesting. He got another one that says this, concerning matter, we have all been wrong. What we have called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceivable to the senses. There is no matter, Albert Einstein. Now, what do you think about that one? It's just vibration. And it's been so lowered so we can perceive it with our senses. And we've been made that way as humans.
It's kind of like everything's a hologram.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. No, nothing's real till it's observed. Now, that's pretty much the law of quantum physics. How do you get your head around that one? Nothing's real till it's observed.
No, it's interesting. It's I love that. I love quantum physics, and I just, it's fascinating, and it makes you wonder. There is a lot of mysteries in this world, and I'll be the first to say I haven't gotten it all figured out. And I think the moment you think you have everything figured out, there's always something that throws you a curveball. There's always, especially even in the Bigfoot world, in this whole topic. There's been many times where I think, aha, I figured it out. And then next week I realize I know nothing.
Yeah, it goes on and on like that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you've been doing this for a long time. Do you ever go back up to where you guys got the sounds?
I've tried. There's been something keep me back each year. If it isn't something falling on my foot just the last minute and breaking my foot or my toe, it's quite a hike in there. It's been something else. There was a fire one year that had the roads blocked off to get up into that area. It didn't burn the area, though. And last time I was up, I think, was 2012. And maybe 2011. I want to get back up this year, but now it's in California, and I live in Washington State. A lot of stuff going on here, which I want to get into. It seems like you just don't have time to do everything, and I don't anyway. Here I'm supposed to be retired from business, and I'm busier now than I ever was, I think.
Yeah. No, I'd like to take you down to Texas and experience some of the stuff going on down there, because it'll blow you away, some of the things going on down there. One of the things I always say on the show, and I know a lot of people have a hard time with it, I always love for a mystery to end. You know what I mean? I want a mystery to end. And I always say that, and I even have a hard time saying it, but I feel like one of these things should be shot. One of these Sasquatch should be shot and brought in. And I've learned over probably the last couple months, through insiders and people in the military I've talked to, that's already been done several times, and people are silenced when that happens. Do you think we'll ever get to the mystery of Sasquatch?
Well, eventually we will. The downside of that is it may not be a good ending. If these things are here, what I project for. I'm not a religious person, but there's some definite prophecies, biblical prophecies, and different cultures too, that talk about the end times and why these things stay so hidden when they're obviously more dominant than us as far as size, strength. They have language, they're cognizant. Everything about them is more than what we appear to be. Not more than what we are, but more than what we think we are. Let's put it that way. And there's a reason they stay hidden, and there's a reason they're not coming out and really allowing themselves to be known. And I've wondered that for 40-some-odd years, because these ones up in the Sierra that I dealt with, and the last one I dealt with was in 2011, definitely an encounter. And yet it wouldn't come out and let me see it. And it was it was daytime.
Tell me about that. I never heard that encounter.
Well, it's the last thing I write about, pretty much the last thing I write about in my Voices in the Wilderness, my book. And Scott Nelson, the cryptolinguist, and I had been up there 3 times that summer, about a week each time, come out and get a shower, resupply, and go back up. And nothing happened. He had his recorder 24/7. Nothing you could definitively say was a Bigfoot anyway. And after Scott had to go back to Missouri where he teaches, I still wanted to go back up and find out these things. Maybe they're gone. Maybe they're not up there anymore. And I had a guy going to go up there with me, and he backed out the last minute. And so I went on up by myself, which is not, you really shouldn't be doing that because a lot of things can happen, not Bigfoot-wise, but there's a lot of ways you can get hurt up there and no help. You're way back in the wilderness. But I set up a little tent when I got to camp. I took enough food for 3 days. I backpacked in. And mosquitoes were horrible. I kept trying to wave them off, but I got inside the tent and just zipped it up and started reading. And it was afternoon. And all of a sudden, right outside the tent, wham, just like a big wood knock right there. It's like a gun going off. It's so loud. And that's what they do. That's just what they do to get your attention. So I waited a few minutes, wondering if I'd go out. I mean, these things are going to be out there dancing around in a circle. What's going to happen? So I did. I went out. The mosquitoes were still bad, so I kept trying to wave them off. And I started talking to it because I know it was there somewhere watching me. And nothing. It wouldn't come out. And I just said, come out and don't come back later when it's dark and try to scare me, because I'm by myself. Of course, they knew that. Anyway, I went back in when it started getting dark and zipped up the little tent. Shelter was about to crash in when the snow load from the previous winter, so I was sleeping in this little one-man tent. At 10 o'clock that night, by the way, let me back up a little bit. I had my little recorder going with brand new lithium batteries, which I checked out earlier after that wood knock. Everything was fine, I thought. 10 o'clock, I heard this chatter going on. It's Bigfoot chatter. And, there they are. I start fumbling with my tape recorder trying to turn it on and get it record. At the same time, something banged a barrel right outside my tent. Those old barrels we took up years ago, which aren't there now. But it hit it and I heard it walking around, bipedal, like a 2-legged elephant. And it was and I started yelling at it. I said, sounds silly, you're by yourself, but it's not silly at all when you're there by yourself. Yeah. And I didn't have a high-powered weapon with me. I think I had a little 22 or a little 38 with birdshot. I'm not sure which, but anyway, I kept listening to it, and I think, in retrospect, I think it was looking for food, something like, because they like our food. They like what we leave for them. But it come right up to the tent, right next to me. I heard it breathing, and I was just frozen. I got to tell you, it's a little petrifying. No matter how much you try to control your fear, you still a little anxiety there,
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden, I didn't hear it anymore. Whatever it was just gone. I didn't even hear it walk away, but it was gone. And that was it until 4 o'clock in the morning. By the way, I didn't sleep much that night, needless to say. But at 4 o'clock that morning, I heard this electronic sound, I can't even identify it orally, but it's like electrical sounds right outside my tent. And that's all. That's all that happened. And it answered my question. My question was, are they still around up there? And so I got up the next morning and I just packed up and left. So my question got answered, but I want to go back because I think I'm going to try to talk them into letting me know some more things. I know they know me, and at least the same family group knows me. And they're not intimidated by anybody, I don't think. But there's a reason they're staying so hidden back from people. And they know I'm not going to shoot at them. That's not my aura, and I'm sure they know what that is. There's things you can do to entice them, I think, and that's what I want to do. I want to stay up there as much as I can if I can get up there this summer and see if I can get a little more data.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see that area. This whole topic fascinates me. There's so many mysteries in the world, and I always enjoy talking with you, Ron, and I hope you come back when your book comes out.
Sure, just ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ron Morehead, the author of Voices of the Wilderness. Check out ronmorehead.com. I love the Sierra Sounds. Ron, thank you for letting me use them when I do retellings of historical accounts. It adds to the story when you're telling them, so thank you for letting me use them.
Thank you, Wes, for asking me. And I don't want anyone to underestimate what these things could be. Just as a last little note here, they better keep their guard up. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some of them try to play with you, and some of them might try to eat you. So just keep your guard up. We as humans got to understand who we are as humans, how important we are, and how special we are as humans. We are dominant on this earth. They cannot, even though they appear to be more, we are the dominant species, and you can command them to leave, and they'll leave.
I appreciate you being on, sir.
Thanks, Wes.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had a encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out the website, sasquatchchronicles.com. Until next time, hopefully my voice will be back on the next show. Look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks for being here tonight. Have a great night, everyone. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. If I sound a little bit hoarse, I apologize to everyone. I've been sick, all week. It's really beat me up, running a high fever, and fever finally broke Saturday morning, and starting to feel a lot better. But for tonight, I've had 3 or 4 cups of coffee, and so I feel like I'm starting to get back to my my old self. Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for listening. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, please visit the website, sasquatchchronicles.com, become a subscriber, get additional shows. Tonight I'll be welcoming 3 guests on. My first guest is Jeremy, and Jeremy went down to the recent expedition in Texas, and he'll be sharing with us some of the things that happened to him, including getting a chunk of concrete thrown at him. Very interesting stuff. I was going to have him on Friday night, but I almost want to say I ran out of time Friday night, but I think it was more or less I wasn't feeling so hot towards the end of the show. But I'm grateful he could be here tonight with us. Jeremy, thanks for coming on tonight.
Oh, man, thanks for having me, Wes. It's a privilege and an honor for sure.
No, the honor's mine. And I know you were out on that expedition trip down in Texas, and I really wanted to have you on the show Friday. Start from the very beginning. Tell us about your experience down there.
Well, man, just overall, it was just awesome experience, man. Obviously I found out about those guys, Bob and those guys from your shows. And we drove up from Wichita, Kansas. It's a little bit of a drive, 8.5, 9 hours. But, man, instantly we got there and met those guys, Mo and those Tim, and all of them were just super cool, welcoming. Instantly made you feel like family. But we were pumped from day one. I mean, you can imagine 8.5, 9 hours of drive and anticipation and excitement. I felt like a kid. And me and an old buddy of mine they used to hunt with, drug him along with me, and we as soon as we got there and met everybody, set up camp, and instantly the story started flying of the past experiences, and man, it was just an awesome overall experience. But definitely would do it again. If anybody's out there listening, you're considering it, man, do it. It's a chance of a lifetime. I was always a believer, but now I'm a knower for sure.
You had a major thing happen when you were on the expedition, but before we get to that, I'm curious, did you hear any vocals, or what did you think of any vocals that you heard?
Yeah, almost immediately, Wes, it's like crazy. You hear these guys talk about it, but they say it's like as soon as the sun goes down, you always hear, a long time hunter and out in the woods quite a bit as a kid here, and even as an adult, and you instantly get that chatter from the coyotes, and that happened instantly, but it's immediately following those coyotes, you're getting calls and howls and screams. It's like, whoa. And, I've heard recordings all my life and never been exposed to anything like this, and it's just hair-raising how fast and how soon those howls and calls started. Immediately. As soon as the sun goes down, it's game on.
Yeah, that's what I noticed, too. I noticed during the day it's pretty quiet there. I mean, I don't remember really hearing anything during the day. It's you'd never even know those were good areas during the day. But you're right, when that sun goes down, I mean, they just start really going off. And then I would say around 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, it all kind of stops, and you don't really hear anything more.
Although I noticed that the Friday night, of course, because we stayed up pretty late Friday night, but Saturday night, after everybody ate, I wasn't feeling real well, so I kind of hit the bed a little early, but I didn't really sleep well, kind of cat napped. But so I was kind of up throughout the entire night, and man, I tell you what, that howling didn't stop at all Saturday night. It was 3, 4, 5 in the morning. It constantly, about every 30, 45 minutes, it was game on all night. Just crazy.
It is crazy there. It's. I've never been to a place like that where it is nonstop like that. Out here in Washington State, you can go to some areas and you might hear something. You can go into some areas, you might hear something, you might not. It's kind of a gamble. But out there, I almost put my money on it every time that you're going to hear something with those guys.
Oh, yeah.
You had a rock thrown at you, didn't you? Was it the concrete?
Yeah, Friday night, man. It was crazy because all the guides were real cool, about whatever you find is yours. We all had our GoPros and all our equipment and everything. But they did tell us, to kind of try to stick close to the camp. Don't really venture out at night, especially on your own, too much. Well, that's just the way I roll. Tim and I said, hey, let's just kind of sneak away from the group, and we grabbed our flashlights and our headlights, and we hit it, man. We started venturing away from the camp there, and just checking things out, looking for footprints, anything. I was just excited. It's just like a kid in a candy store. So we rolling a little bit further away from camp, and we get in this almost like a corner of this tree line, if I can explain it. And as soon as you get, I bet I was 5 to 15 foot maybe from that tree line. Everything's so thick, it's hard to determine how close you are to the tree line. But all of a sudden, I heard this whack. I mean, it's hard to explain how loud this thing came whizzing over at me. And it basically is a chunk of concrete about 5 foot in diameter. It's 5 inches in diameter, about 5 pounds. Sorry. But that thing came in with authority and just cracked a piece of deadfall right by me. I mean, within 10 feet of me. So instantly I'm thinking I'm ahead of Tim, my buddy. And I turned around and said, Tim, did you just throw that at me, dude? He's like, throw what? I heard the noise, but throw what? And I got to back up a little bit, backstory on Tim. He's been in a bad car wreck, man. His back is toast. I mean, for him to bend over and even touch the ground, let alone pick up a piece of 5-pound concrete and throw it, impossible. I knew that, but I'm still questioning, I'm like, no way, that did not just happen. And he's like, I swear I did not throw that. I did not throw that. So I'm like, oh my God. So instantly I'm starting to freak out. We start shining in the general area where it came from, or at least where I thought it came from. And you can hear some movement. I don't want to say it sound like real crazy stuff going on, but you could hear movement in the brush. And then almost immediately I heard this roar. I mean, it was this crazy scream. And I looked at him and he looked at me, Tim, and we just boogied out of there. We went running back to camp, and I found Mo and Tim. I said, this just got thrown at me, swear to God. I mean, I was freaking out, shaking. I couldn't even talk. It was crazy, man. Yeah, and come to find out later, I don't know if you've talked to Chuck, a guy named Chuck that was with us, man. He had an audio recorder out there, and I didn't even realize. So he answered me back on your blog a couple nights ago. He said, you're not going to believe this. I'm playing back my audio recorder. It was out back where you got that rock thrown at you, and I got it all on audio. He said, I can hear the crack. I can hear you questioning Tim. He said, I got it all. It's crazy.
Yeah, I had Chuck on Friday night, and he casted some tracks, and he was telling us about his experience. But it kind of goes to show you, too, how dangerous things can be. It's kind of like I was telling you when I was there, we had that log thrown at me and Bob, and that would have taken one of our heads off if it didn't hit the tree in front of us.
Yeah.
And just like that piece of concrete, man, that thing would have hit you in the head. I mean, Jesus.
Well, it did lights out.
Yeah.
Absolute lights out, man. And it's just crazy. Like I said, I'm about a 2-year diehard into every spare moment I have. Even I own and operate a collision repair facility here in town, and I walk around all day with a piece of earphone in and listening to your show all day, man. I mean, I'm a diehard. I've heard about rocks throwing and logs thrown at people, but never did I think that it could happen to me, especially night one, you know. It was nuts.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you got a chance to experience it, at least in a safe way, you know, relatively safe way. No one got harmed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those guys definitely made you feel safe. I mean, they always had your back and always looking around thinking of things that you normally wouldn't think of. It definitely made it safe. Although, saying that, Saturday night, I was so into my head by that point. Saturday night, I couldn't even step out the tent to go to the restroom. I literally unzipped it long enough to get out there and do my business, and I was dying back in. I was scared to death Saturday night, you know, on your own.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Were you able to capture any of that on audio? Or did you take audio recorders with you?
This trip, I didn't think to take audio at all, but thank goodness that Chuck guy's got it. He said he'd be able to hook up with me later, maybe give me a copy of that. But we did, I don't know if Chuck and those guys told you, we more or less, I got a day sighting, if you call it a day sighting, too, Saturday during the day after our first little day, our excursion during the day. Everybody kind of regrouped, and the second group wasn't back yet. And so it was just Chuck, and I think, is it Tim's wife or Mark's wife? Is it Vicky? I don't know if you know them or not, but she was there kind of keeping an eye on camp. So I kind of, Chuck and I hung back with her, and she comes running over and she says, I got one on my camera, on my iPhone. And we're like, whoa, let's look at it. And sure enough, she got a picture of one. So where did it come from? Obviously, we're over there in the area. And Chuck and I, about the same time, yep, there's something moving right there. So I could see, I would say maybe a half of a head and maybe an eyeball, and it just kind of darted in behind the trees. Well, this whole time, Chuck's taking pictures with his 35 millimeter film camera. I mean, he's seeing everything I'm seeing and snapping pictures. So I ran off to my tent to grab my binoculars. And, of course, by the time I come back, all the action was gone. But, yeah, and, I did about the same time that Waylon flew his drone over there and got a little video of it kind of running back into the woods. So we had some daytime activity, too, Saturday.
That's crazy. Was that all in the same place?
All the same place. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. And I'm anxious to hear if Chuck had got his, did he mention if he had got any of that developed yet, that film?
Yeah, I'll have to ask him. I'll have to ask him if he got it. I know someone did have a daytime sighting. I wasn't sure if that was you or if that was someone else. That's crazy, man. It's weird, though, that you don't hear them, though, during the day, do you? I mean, you don't. I mean, they aren't screaming. They're not really yelling. They're not really vocalizing like they do at night. At night, it's like you think they become alive at night or something.
Right. Obviously, that's their territory at night, and I think daytime they're just awesome stealth mode. I didn't hear anything during the day at all. It was pretty cool. And definitely will go back, man. A lot of people say that. I mean, I'm going back. I don't know whether I'll drag the wife there with me, but I'm going back. I'm addicted from this point on.
Well, again, I'm glad you got a chance to experience it. You know, it really is an experience of a lifetime, and it's a lot of fun to go down there. And I'm going to make it down on the next one or the one after that. I'm not sure yet, but I'd love to go down there and just hang out and get a sighting, you know, or get vocals. One of the things, the only advice I give to people, I wish I would have done, is buy a couple digital recorders, take them with you, because you will get some great audio out there.
Oh, yeah. Next time I'll definitely do that. I just had no idea, what all I needed this trip, but I know now. I'll do that next time. Yeah. If I had any complaints at all about the entire trip, and nothing could have been happened, but I wish I could have spent more time with Bob. He's just such a piece of knowledge. I wanted to scrub as much as I could off of him, but we enjoyed him while we had him. It was awesome.
Yeah, he's good people. Bob's a good man.
Oh, man. Yeah. And his boys are awesome, too. Got to visit with him quite a bit Friday night. So.
Yeah, Brandon and Travis, those are good guys, too. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for coming on the show and sharing the experience, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, it was awesome, man. I'll definitely do it again, and thanks for having me on, man. It's definitely an honor. You're my hero, man, for sure.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, next up on the show, I want to welcome Robert. Robert, thanks for coming on tonight.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be with you.
Thank you, sir. And if you would, now you had an interesting encounter with your son. Do you kind of want to start from the beginning and just walk us right into what happened?
Yeah, it's been a good while ago, and from the very beginning, it didn't seem like such a big deal until later on there were threads that seemed to more make sense of it. But in any case, my son at the time was 12 years old. We had a golden retriever by the name of Ginger, a really fine dog. And it just so happens that I had a business visit in Charlottesville on a Saturday morning, and my son said, well, Dad, we've got stuff in the car. Why don't we go up to Coal Mountain, or he may have said Widgeon Springs area, and sleep under the stars tonight? And I said, well, you know, that's a little crazy because it's going to get cold. He said, well, it's not going to be that bad, I don't think. Well, in the end, we ended up going to a shelter on the Appalachian Trail about 1.5 miles off U.S. Route 60 North. The shelter is called Cow Camp Gap, I believe it is, and it's your classical three-side shelter. We set up camp there and decided to make some food, hot food, which we needed because it was getting really cold, maybe probably in the middle 20s at the time. And this area is, you know, on the Appalachian Trail, and it's your typical shelters I talked about with a small stream in front of the shelter and a picnic table. While we were drinking and eating some food, Ginger started barking. The thing is, we had camped out a lot, and she was familiar, and she wasn't happy to see bears or hear them, but she knew what they were, and so did I. I looked up, and I saw, at first it was confusing because it was a rather tall man, I thought, and it was about dark, so we really couldn't tell a whole lot until it got closer. Then I realized this thing is wearing a fur coat. It was brown, really dark brown. And Ginger is continuing to bark. I called her to my side. She came to my side while I was sitting at the picnic table, and without thinking, I sort of hollered at this man, beast, whatever it was, and said, come on over and have some hot chocolate. This thing turned, and that's when the dog went berserk. She had a problem. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before or afterwards. The best way to describe it was she had no control over her hind legs, and she was making this, instead of a barking, it was a gurgling sound like she was being choked. This thing, it looked like it turned and maybe waited for maybe 15 seconds, then it turned away and took about 2 or 3 steps and literally just disappeared into this twilight kind of darkness. What it looked like in its face, I couldn't really tell you. I could see there were eyes and a nose, but I couldn't tell you whether there was much hair on it or whether it was a man with a heavy beard. It just wasn't enough daylight.
Did you notice the color being uniform across the whole?
It did. It was very uniform. And again, you know, when you say, well, it's bitter cold, hey, people wear fur coats. And so it was really confusing. And like I said, I was not uncomfortable in calling out. Now, let me tell you that behind this creature down, or this being behind it, the closest house was probably 2 miles. Ahead of it, the closest house was 2.5 or maybe 3. There's nothing in between. It had no flashlight or anything, and it's getting dark. That's the thing that later on I kept, and my son, we discussed it later on amongst us, between the two of us. We never told anyone else. I think I told my wife that there was an odd occurrence and that we don't know what we saw. And And she kind of scolded us because we were out in this weather. We probably, had we known, we wouldn't have been there, that it was going to get as cold as it did. It got down into the maybe below 10 degrees that night. Ginger, on the other hand, recovered, but she tried to get into my lap, which was the strangest thing I've ever seen. You know, she was terrified. During the night, she sat between my son and I at attention. She never laid down the entire night.
Yeah, that is strange behavior for a dog.
Well, it was later on that it became even stranger with Ginger. It was.
Let me ask you, before we get into that, how did the creature turn? Did it just turn its head and look over at you guys?
No, it turned its whole body, and it was squared away at us. And I could, if I had to guess, I would say this thing was at least 6'5" or so. I won't say it was 7'5" or anything like that, or taller. I would guess that it would weigh upper 200s, maybe 280, 300 pounds from the size. But again, this thing was covered with brown hair, and it was really hard to distinguish. And did I notice the size of the arms or the length? No, I didn't, because it happened too quick. And as I told you earlier, Wes, my son and I, we were not into this thing. We were not into Bigfoot, UFOs. He and I, we were hanger rats. We loved aviation, but we're more grounded, if you know what I mean, into the real things that you put your hands on every day.
Right, and I understand that. You know, it's interesting the way your dog reacted. Do you remember if the creature made any sort of vocalization?
No, there was no sound from it at all.
That's interesting. I almost wonder if it did growl, and it was such a low. They do have a low guttural growl, but I almost wonder if it was such a low growl when the dog picked up on it, and that's what terrified the dog. I'm speculating, I don't know, but that's a fascinating encounter. And there was nothing else that happened the rest of the night then, huh?
No, we didn't hear anything. It was quite windy. We suffer from the cold. He and I were, we thought we were ready for it, but when you're talking about below 10 degrees and it's windy, you're never going to be comfortable, as far as I know, with the equipment that we had. We had some wool blankets, and it was just bitter cold. I think the only other thing I can think of with that thing was the total surprise, and that my son and I were not afraid, though. We didn't have any fear about us. But it was Ginger who she was one upset. I never heard her make the sound she made before or after. And that dog lived to be 15 years old. She was 3 years old at that time.
Yeah.
Constant companion.
No, and they are, and usually dogs are the ones you pay attention to in situations like that, especially with these things, or really any predators, really. If you pay attention to the dog will tell you where it's at.
Well, yeah, she would, we would hear bears, or she would alert me to something going on, and then eventually you'd hear a black bear around here. They make a kind of a sniffing noise, like, that they're sniffing and trying to find and tearing away stumps to look for bugs and whatever they can get to eat. And they don't like dogs. And so Ginger, being as she was, if I called her to my side and put her on alert by saying, listen, she would perk up, and I put my hand on her head and just flinch it. She would bark until told to stand down. She was a wonderful dog to have. I never, ever felt any kind of concern for bears. And we, in this area, we don't have wolves, or I think there's some coyotes, and every once in a while somebody says they've seen a mountain lion, but I don't believe that. You just don't. They've been gone from this area many, many, many years. That area, by the way, though, is heavily populated with deer. I mean, they're
like roaches out there, huh?
Oh, that mountain called Cold Mountain, I would guess it's like a big loaf of bread, more or less, with fairly steep sides. And when you get to the crown, you'd find a lot of trees growing down the side of it. But when you get to the top, it's maybe a little bit of mountain laurel, but it's got a lot of vegetation. And that mountain in that area is probably 500 or 600 yards at the very least, the narrowest part across. A lot of vegetation in the summertime. The deer are up there eating, and plenty of butterflies. It's a wonderful place to go to. But and the deer, especially when you start getting around late September, they'll be in there on that mountain in groups of 10 and 12 eating, and you can literally walk within 5 feet of them, and they won't even pick their head up because they're putting on fat for the winter. It gets tough around there. They're fairly large, but again, getting back to this area and the habitat is, if there is a being called Sasquatch, if it's real, yeah, it could make a living off the deer there with no trouble. There's plenty of them.
Well, let me ask you, what do you think you ran into that night?
You know, something after the last few months of reading through some sites, I got a feeling we saw something, and it wasn't a man and it wasn't a bear. What does that leave? This thing about misidentifying bears, that's a crazy. I've been around too many of them, and they don't stand up to be 6 feet tall around here. They're not that big, and they may weigh 180 to 250 pounds. But and it's unusual to see one in the 300 or 400 pound range. And when they are always on all fours. They may sort of rear up a little bit, but they're stooped over, and they never appear to be over about 5 feet tall. I've seen so many of them and took a lot of pictures over the years. And Ginger had a lot of experience around them. She wasn't afraid of them. She knew the bark and would send them away.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have called out to it and said, "Hey, do you want hot chocolate?" if you would have thought for one moment it was a bear. I think at first when he saw it, it sounds like you probably thought it was a guy.
I did, but then it became, later on, my son and I talked about it. He said, "Dad, I think that was a man, but if it was a very, very tall man." And the one other thing I can relate to you is that this thing was very athletic, for this man. And hey, I've seen Ralph Sampson, and he's a big, tall guy, or was back in his prime, but he didn't appear to be as athletic and smooth as this thing was walking. It was like poetry. This thing wasn't some out-of-shape dude, I'll tell you that much.
Now, you went back, and you had another strange experience there. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. About 8 years later, I returned to that area with just Ginger. And I had the intention of walking down to that shelter again. And I don't think at the time I was really thinking, well, it would clarify my mind about anything, because it really wasn't a big issue for me. But when I got to the tree line to start down the path off that mountain down to the shelter, Ginger stayed back. Normally she would be in front of me, but when we got near that tree line, she stopped. She sat down, her ears were perked up, and it was like her nose was up. She wouldn't go with me. Even when I called her and went back and petted her and started back down, she sat down. She didn't go with me. And so I declined to go down to that area. I've been to that shelter one time, and that was the one time I had that experience. And let me tell you, that would have been probably 92 or 93. A few years later, I took my mother to this little town called Buena Vista, which is about 15 miles from there. I told you this, where that trail, the Appalachian Trail crosses Route 60. That shelter was about maybe a mile or mile and a half to the north. Buena Vista is about 15 miles away, and this particular Sunday, it was in the wintertime, and snow was on the ground, and we stopped at a restaurant. There was no one there except a cook and a young teenager who was doing the waitress stuff. And so my mother, who loves children of all ages, of course, just mentioned something to the little girl about, I really love this place. I'd love to live here. Are there any houses for sale? And then I spoke up and I said, yeah, especially around Coffeetown and Coal Mountain. And she turned to me and she said, she said, I got to tell you, I've got a couple of uncles who have hunted all their life. They saw something a few years back that scared them so bad they have stopped hunting. And I'm thinking, that's sort of, it was another little thread. And then a couple of years later, I was in Buena Vista at a little paper plant they had there, and was talking to the plant manager, and he had to leave, and it was in the employee break room, and I was just started talking to one of the employees, and I said, do you live close by? And then he said, I live in Lowesville. And I said, well, this Coffeetown area, are there any houses for sale through there again? And he said, yeah. He said, starting about maybe 10 years ago, we've had a lot of people empty out from that area, and there are quite a few houses for sale. These are little mountain houses, if you know what I mean. They're on dirt roads and fairly secluded. And we got to talking, and I asked him, I said, a few years ago, something happened to me up here. Have you guys ever had anything that was really unusual? And he said, well, back in the middle 80s, we had a fall and winter where I had a neighbor that lost a calf. We never found it. And then he said, and we had some dogs that were constantly barking at night. A number of them got missing. He said, we called the sheriff, and the sheriff said, well, maybe it's some coyotes stirring up a mess, but they never found anything, and he didn't elaborate on it anymore. Other than that, I've been back through that area a few times, and one time I had kind of a creepy feeling. I don't know what it was. It caused me to really reconsider going to that area by myself again, and I haven't gone on these hikes I used to go on, but I am getting old. As I told you, I'll be 70 in May. That's a little old to be by yourself 5 or 6 miles from any human beings, even with cell phones.
Yeah, it's like I always tell people, Robert, it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. You should never be out there alone, in situations like that, in case something happens, you know what I mean?
Especially, and so one of the reasons I became interested in this whole story again, Wes, was in August of 2011, that's 5 years ago, coming up in August, a hiker by the name of Lily. So that's a really busy area in the summer, a lot of hikers, because you can hike off 60, and this, like I told you, this mountain is very beautiful, and it's accessible, and, hey, it's a great place to go with children, too. You can get children there. It's not such a terrible hike from a road called Widgeon Springs Road, I believe it is. In any case, a hiker by the name of Lily was discovered dead. The FBI says, and the cause of death is listed as asphyxiation. He was strangled or suffocated, I don't know. And the odd thing was that he was half buried. That is really odd, and it was at that shelter. So again, these strings really have sort of brought that original encounter back, to memory. And again, I have a son. He is 40 now, And as I told you, we talked this morning briefly about why people don't come forward. Well, he's in the medical field, so that's where, and he would be happy to talk, but he probably wouldn't be willing to come on your program, however, and I understand that. We just, there's probably a lot more encounters that people just don't talk about. And again, my own, it don't make a lot of sense to me, Wes. How in the heck can something that's so often reported go without some sort of evidence being left behind? I don't know that answer.
Yeah, well, going back to the first point, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I understand people who don't want to come forward, who have professional careers. It's like I was telling you, I have airline pilots that told me about their encounters, and they're like, hey, man, I can't come on the show. They'll take my wings if they catch wind of me talking about Bigfoot. I understand that. I completely understand that.
And these are they're sane people. They do their jobs every day, and they're certainly reliable. The people in my life, my daughter-in-law and my grandchildren, adore me, and I've got folks who think I'm a solid person they can rely on for friendship and times they need, and that's a great thing about a life that you really think about and try to live, in an honest manner. And getting back what I told you about dogs, I said, I think this morning that the one thing about dogs is they don't lie, they don't hoax, and they're the most faithful of animals that may be on God's earth. I do love dogs, and after Ginger, by the way, I never got another one. It just hurt too bad when she died.
Yeah.
And other people have told me the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I hear you on that. I'm the same way. I always say I'm never going to get another one. I'll get a dog, and I'll love that dog to death, as long as it lives. And then when it's gone, I break down like a child.
Yeah.
And I'll say I'll never get one again. I'm never doing that again. And I always end up getting one. But I understand that completely. Going back to your other comment with regard to not finding anything, and I know this is kind of the generic answer, and I guess I don't have a better answer for you, but you don't really find any dead deer that die naturally.
Unless on the side of the road, yeah.
Yeah, unless they get hit on the side of the road, or I've never come across a dead bear either that died naturally, or so. I mean, a lot of these animals, especially predators. Most predators will go off deep into the woods when they know they're going to die, and I don't know how it is out there, but I know here in Washington State, a dead carcass will last about a week, 2 weeks tops, and there won't be much of anything left by the time the scavengers get to it, and it rots and everything else.
Yeah.
But it is frustrating. A lot of people see this thing, and more and more people are coming forward. And I think it's just a matter of time before this comes out. I really do.
Well, for me, since I have some time on my hands, I'm thinking about getting a really good camera, doing a better job than what I see on the internet, where these people are sweeping these cameras at a high rate. I mean, I don't see the things that are pointing out on a lot of those websites, Wes. I don't get it. I mean, and I've got a big video, I've got a big screen that I can view stuff on, 48 inches, and I just don't see anything most of the time. And so I look at this as that the evidence just is not good enough right now. And who's going to get it, I don't know. And why we don't get it with all the trail cams out, I don't know that either. I hope somebody does come up with and gets some definitive picture. So I see on the internet all the objections that the skeptics have. And the one that drives me crazy is about them being blurry and whatever. Well, I tell you what, you take a long lens, wonderful SLR that I had years ago, and you set it on a tripod, and if you have someone walking across that field of view 200 yards away, you're not going to get much. And it was state-of-the-art with the fastest color film or black and white film. It's going to be blurry. And if you're trying to hold it without a camera without a tripod, it makes it much more difficult to get anything.
It goes back to what I was saying. You know, videos and pictures will never prove this. They'll say you hoaxed it. They'll say it's a guy in a costume. They'll say this. They'll say that. Unfortunately, someone's going to have to shoot one and bring it in. It just has to happen. As cold as that sounds, it has to happen because, you know, there has been good pictures that have been put out on the web, and then people just get attacked left and right. You know, oh, you're hoaxing this. That's a guy in a suit. It's kind of like Bob Gimlin.
Yeah.
In the Roger Patterson film. You know, Bob, he took heat for, I don't know how many years that guy took heat for that video. And he wanted nothing to do with this topic for many, many years because everyone said, oh, it's a guy in a suit, it's a guy in a suit, it's a guy in a suit. Well, how many years later are we still looking at that film and they can't prove it to be a fake? They can't prove it to be a guy in a suit. In fact, as technology grows, it's leaning more towards it being real.
That's what I've been seeing, that there's some pretty good folks with the pretty good videographers, and they're pretty good analysts. And some of these people are coming out of the military, and and some of them are doggone good with photo analysis. My job was in traffic analysis, and I, you know, the complexity of that was a lot more difficult than seeing something visually. And the people that I knew way back in my time that were getting video off cameras in Vietnam and elsewhere, man, they could point out things that you know, I would look at and I wouldn't see anything, but yeah, they could see a little man perched behind a log when I couldn't see the log hardly. So anyway,
well, we hope one day it gets proven.
If there is someone that does shoot one and it becomes, you know, it may save the rest of the population, because the pressure that I can see could be putting on such a being or groups of them is considerable. We're just tightening up the areas where they could possibly live the way they apparently have lived, if they exist at all, over the last centuries. And the Appalachian Trail seems to be an area, though, that gets a fair number of reports. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. And the West Coast has a couple of trails, too, I understand. Are there any reports from those trails that you've heard of?
Yeah, there definitely is. I know with the Appalachian Trail, not only is there a lot of sightings, there's a lot of missing people on that come up missing in that area.
I don't know about the missing people. It's not uncommon. It's not usual, but it's not uncommon for there to be homicides. There was a crazy guy that apparently killed two women. There were two women who were camping together, and they were killed here a few years back. But it's, you know, it's not uncommon, but it's not terrible. You go 3 or 4 years without anything happen. But this guy, Lily, that poor man and his sister has no idea. I feel bad for him that there's no answer for why that man was killed. And he doesn't seem to be someone that presented money as a focus or anything else. He just was a guy that was from Fort Wayne, Indiana, I believe, and had come to this area to look at the old Civil War battle areas and to do some hiking, and fell in love with the trail. It can be enticing for people who do have mental issues, by the way. Wes, I've been there and had people come through the day, you know, they were through hikers, and I really worried about them. They were just, they were not acting like, you know, like my brothers or sisters would, I'll tell you that. And I'm not saying anything bad about all the hikers, but there's some folks that are on the trail that have had problems. And one of the things the FBI and the agent in Charlottesville, I talked with them about when I knew there was they were looking for, you know, strange people who were like stood out, and there was a fellow, but this area is remote, and the fellow that I had contact with several times, he never ventured more than about 50 yards from his truck, you know. So they don't have any real solid leads. Now it's been almost 5 years. Again, I feel sorry for the man's family. I do.
Yeah, my heart goes out to the family.
Yeah.
Robert, thank you for coming on the show, sir. I appreciate you sharing the encounter.
You're welcome, Wes, and I'd love to get out the West Coast and maybe travel some of the areas where where the big guys, because I think from what I can see, the reports around here are generally not from super big, massive, that some people out in the West Coast report seeing, and up in Canada, yeah. It makes me feel a little bit better about the whole thing, getting it off my chest, sort of, you know.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear. Talking about it helps.
Yeah, talk is good.
Thanks, Robert. And my final guest tonight is Ben. Ben, thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate it.
No problem.
And if you would, you actually had, well, a couple of encounters. The major one that sticks out was a hiking trip. Do you want to kind of start from the beginning? Kind of tell us what you were doing. Walk us right into what happened, what you experienced.
Okay. This was August 29th last year. It was going to be an overnight backpacking trip, definitely a rugged rural area in a national park. It was quite remote. It was 7 miles in from the nearest road, or, you know, it was just a hiking path. Elevation was almost 11,000 feet. And there was a lake there, and I had my spy rod, caught quite a few trout, released them all. It was a good evening. But I kind of had a sense that I was being watched. It was kind of creeping me out. And there was where we had camped, there was a ravine that it started out kind of narrow and shot up the mountain and got wider, and then it went up above tree line. And to the left side of that, there was smaller trees, the Christmas trees, maybe 10, 14 feet tall. And that was the area where I kept thinking something's eyeballing me, but I could never catch a glimpse of anything. And I forgot all about it. It got dark. We had a little fire, had a good conversation. About 10 o'clock, 10:30, hit the sack. And I had my tent maybe 150 feet closer to the mountain than my buddy, towards the tree line and this ravine. 12 o'clock comes around. I get up to go to the bathroom. Everything's calm, nice. The moon was out. It was bright. It was a super moon. I don't think it was all the way up yet above the mountains, but I went back to bed, and at 2 o'clock, and I say 2 because I looked at my phone later to check the time, there's only two things that could have been, is a slap or a clap. Like, if you took your hand, hit your palm as hard as you could, it was loud. And it was I would say maybe 10 feet from my tent, maybe 15 on my right side. And I was immediately awake, and staring into that direction. After about maybe 30 seconds, there was a crow call, unlike anything I've ever heard before. It really creeped me out. Right when I heard it, I knew it wasn't a crow at 2 a.m. It didn't really sound like a crow, but it was meant to sound like the crow. And at the end of the call, it got really kind of deep and gurgly, and this thing lost it. At that point, the fear kicked in. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I was terrified. And I listened, and I could hear footsteps move around my tent towards the bottom end. And, I'm listening, the sound stops, and I look at the bottom end of my tent, and I see at first what I thought was a massive shadow. And then I realized it was behind me. This is a shape. My tent was a light yellow, and I'm looking right through it at this thing. This thing was massive, and it was swaying back and forth. Not a lot, but enough movement to pick it out. And because of the moon, how bright it was, and because of how light my tent was, I was getting a pretty good look at the shape of this thing. And I would estimate it was at least 7-8 feet tall. I would say, I don't know, the shoulders on this thing would just not something you forget. Very wide shoulders, I would say about 42 inches wide at least, maybe 48. But the head seemed proportionately small on the shoulders to me. At that point, I don't know, I was losing it. I was trying to calm myself down. I had my pistol in my hand, pointed at this thing. I'm trying to talk myself out of this, like, this can't be happening. After about 30 seconds of looking at this thing, a cloud covered up the moon, and it was dark. After what seemed like quite a while, it was probably about 15 seconds, so the moon came back out, and this thing was gone. Now this thing is on. Now I'm pretty sure I'm looking at a Sasquatch, which is kind of a hard concept to wrap my head around. But I mean, there just wasn't anything else it could be. Now it's on my left side, the left side of my tent towards the tree line. Oh, and I forgot when it did its crow call. There was an answer at the tree line. The only way I can describe it is just air passing through the lips. It wasn't a distinct call. It was just more of, you could just hear, I don't know how to describe it.
Kind of like a lip blow?
Yeah, I guess that would be a perfect way to describe it. But definitely an answer. And so I knew there were at least two of them. When this call happened, I know it woke up my buddy, and I could hear him kind of shifting around on his mat. I wanted to call out to him, but I couldn't. I was just kind of paralyzed. I couldn't even muster up the courage to yell. I was pretty terrified at that point. So basically, at the point of the call, I had grabbed my phone. I had seen the time. I had my pistol. I knew it was 2 o'clock in the morning. This thing was creeping around. I couldn't say if it was more than one at one time, but always I would hear one, and it was distinct footsteps. If you've been out in the woods enough, it's fairly easy to recognize what 4 feet versus 2 sounds like, and this was definitely something on 2 legs creeping around, and it was heavy. I was trying to be quiet, and when there would be a twig snap, this thing would freeze, and then would continue just kind of working back and forth around on the left side of my tent, maybe 20 to 30 feet out. And sometimes the activity would pick up, and I would think this thing's going to attack. It would sound more like it was shuffling around or moving quicker. At those points, I would turn on my laser sight and point it in that direction, and that seemed to calm things down, or it would quiet it down for a minute. But this went on till basically first light, just before first light. And before it was all over, this thing charged the tent. And that was probably the scariest moment because it just sounded like an elephant charging the tent. It was very loud, very heavy steps, moving quick. And at the last second, this thing peeled off my tent. I fully expected my tent to collapse. I was ready to fire at that point, although I didn't want to shoot at this thing because, honestly, it was so large, I didn't think that a 45 was enough to take this thing down. And, I mean, I was too I was scared to make this thing even matter at me. And you don't want to just start shooting off in the dark anyway without a clear shot or something. But I had my friend out in the tent, and it was that concern. But when it charged, there was that thought crossed my mind that I needed to be ready to shoot.
That's interesting about it charging your tent, coming in and charging your tent. God, I can't imagine sitting there with a gun, hoping to God that it doesn't run you over. You know what I mean?
Oh man, it was so loud that the footsteps, and part of it was I'm on the ground and picking up the vibrations coming through the ground, and being around horses, things that are heavy, it gives you an idea of what the vibration that you kind of pick up in the ground when these things move is the same type of deal. Definitely a heavy animal.
I think it's interesting, too, your description. It's like you and I were talking the other night. I took so much crap over talking about what I saw, and, I said it was proportioned like a cartoon, and its head really seemed like it should have been bigger for the body. I mean, the head
definitely
seemed like it was way out of, I find that interesting, and it's interesting, too, how you just zoomed in on the shoulders. And that's so, I guess it's hard for people, maybe to picture, because whenever I do these shows, I always try and think about what the listener would want to hear. What would the listener want to, what questions would they want me to ask? And it's really hard to articulate how big the shoulders are on these things.
I've definitely, I've tried to my wife, my poor wife has heard this story probably 30 times. And I know she's tired of it, but it affected me. It's something that I think about on a nightly basis. And that's one of the things that I keep trying to tell her is that the shoulders on this thing, you just can't even imagine the size.
And so what did you do next?
Well, after the charge, it's still dark, but you could just tell that things were starting to lighten up. And after that, there was a few more noises creeping around, but not as intense. And eventually, these things left. There was no way I was going to sleep. And so I just lay there in my tent until it was light. And it was weird. When these things were gone, it just felt like, oh, great, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay now. They're gone. Like, it was just like this weight was lifted off me. The fear was gone. The woods were safe again. The fear that I felt with these things around was indescribable. And I don't know what that is. Before I even saw this thing through the tent, I had that fear, that primal, like, something out there could kill me right now, is what it felt like, or like I felt like I was being hunted a little bit.
Yeah, and that's interesting, too. It makes me wonder, as I was thinking about your encounter after you and I spoke, it made me wonder, obviously this was their playground that you guys had decided to set up shop in, because you were, 7 miles in, weren't you?
7 miles in, and it was a very remote area. There was no people in there.
And then you get out to pee, and, there was one experience I can tell you about in Texas. where it was my girlfriend that actually peed. She stepped away from camp to go pee in the bushes, and shortly after that, something threw something towards the camp, where we were all sitting, right where she had come from. And so, I almost wonder if, it's kind of like a dog. If you're ever out in the woods and you stop and you pee, well, your dog's got to stop and pee in that spot. And I almost wonder if these things see that as, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like you're violating their territory, or
yeah, like you're marking their territory. You're marking their territory, and I almost wonder if that's what kind of set the mood, set the tone that night. Did you and your buddy talk after this?
Now, yes, and his face was white. He was scared. You could tell he was definitely terrified, just like me. But here's one thing that I figured out is, even though he heard the calls and that slap, and I don't know, I've thought about that, if it was a hand, or if it was like a slap to the chest. I just know it was loud. So he heard those two things. I'm not sure if he heard the answer to because the lip blow wasn't very loud. But these things weren't cruising around his tent. So I don't know how much of that he heard. I know he was too scared to come out of his tent, even though he had to pee from the time he woke up at 2 o'clock until morning, but he would not come out. And he laughed at himself. He was like, just being silly, scared of these, some animal. And I told him exactly what it was. He laughed it off. Because, to some people, this just isn't even within the realm of possibility. It's hoaxed, it's this, it's that.
I think sometimes, too, people are better off knowing that they don't exist. That makes them feel...
I think you're right, Wes, because it's definitely changed how I've spent so much time in the woods and done so many of these trips, and now I hesitate a little bit. I haven't been back. I haven't been out since. I don't want to let it ruin my lifestyle, but at the same time, I'm not too anxious to go back there unless there was at least our whole group. I'd feel much better about that. And I guarantee you next time I'm not going to have my tent apart from the group.
The other interesting point that you brought up was the laser pointer. It's something Bob Garrett's told me. It's something, a lot of these guys have been doing this for a long time. They say a laser pointer is almost better than a gun sometimes because it will stop these things in their tracks. And I find it interesting that you turned on your laser pointer and you said things kind of seemed to calm down.
Yeah, I could freeze them. I could, and I say them. I don't know if both of them or if there was even more. I don't know, Wes. But I definitely know one was coming in very close. But yeah, when the activity started to be working up into a frenzy, and I would point that laser at them for where I thought they were, it would shut them up. I was glad I had it.
I bet. One of the things, too, is with their calls, when they mimic different things like crows and owls, I noticed that, especially down in Texas, you would hear an owl. And I remember stopping and going, oh, wow, that's a really loud owl call. And then at the very end, they would always screw it up. They would always screw up the very ending of it. And you would know right then it wasn't an owl.
Yes, that's exactly how there was no doubt in my mind that, for one thing, a crow just doesn't have a set of lungs like that. Like you said, the volume was way too loud. Even the beginning wasn't on point as far as the call. It was close, though.
Yeah.
Give them that. The head on this thing, Wes, it just looked like it was set on the shoulders. I hope I can get that sketch to you because that's pretty much exactly what I saw. But it's weird. If you're just seeing a silhouette, it's like there's no neck.
Yeah, and from what I'm told, they do have a neck, but it's very small. But I tend to agree with you. That's what most people describe. It had no neck. The head sat right on the shoulders. It's just weird, man. I can picture in my head what you saw because I've seen something similar, and it's just weird. It's like a cartoon, proportioned like a cartoon. Did you notice how long its arms were, or anything else about?
I could just see a little separation, with light coming through, but I couldn't give you, an exact length or, even come close with the dark. And, I'm basically just looking at a perfect silhouette.
That's understandable.
But, back to the shoulders, it's unbelievable. And I pulled out a tape when I got home. I didn't want, and I don't want to exaggerate anything, I want to tell exactly how it was, what I saw, and I feel that 42 to 48 inches is right on.
Well, I'm just glad that you guys made it out okay. Did you guys leave that day, the following day?
Yes, we did. We packed right up that morning and headed out.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad to hear it. A lot of times, with encounters like this, and you'll hear it through historical accounts, you'll hear it through witnesses that get harassed like this, especially if they're bluff charging your tent. A lot of times, if you stay another night, it gets 100 times worse if you make it out of there. And if you're seven miles back, and they decide to really engage in a fight, and you have a 45, you're probably not coming out.
I used to really feel safe with, a 45 or a pistol, and it was interesting how quickly that view changed. I didn't feel quite as comfortable, even armed.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. Now, you had a couple strange encounters prior to this, didn't you?
Yeah, and then it's weird that it happened just months before that. It was in June or July, and it was in Utah. We were on another camping trip, and it was a similar type place as far as granite peaks, a lake and a bowl, and we were at the very edge of the campground. We had to hike in a ways, so we were in the primitive area. I had my family, and I have a 15-year-old daughter. She had a friend, and we had all gone in the tent to go to bed, and those two girls were sitting out by the fire. My daughter's very independent. She's never called for me because she's been scared before. I hear Dad in a really concerned, worried voice, and I jumped right up, once again, grabbed my pistol, went out there, and she said, Dad, there's something creeping around just outside of the firelight. And I said, well, what do you mean, like a deer? No. Well, was it a person? Well, kind of. And I'm like, what do you mean, kind of? And she said, well, it seemed like it was too big to be a person. And I really couldn't pin her down. The subject of Sasquatch and stuff is just not something that she's ever allowed into our conversation. But I could tell that she saw something that had her concerned. And she said that this thing had gone along just outside of the firelight and then gone behind some brush and trees behind our tent, maybe feet, in this little ravine. And so I had my light and I headed that way. As I got close, a pine cone comes flying out, and it was actually pretty close to hitting me. And that stopped me dead in my tracks. And I got this really weird feeling that I shouldn't go any farther. And I stopped right there. And I got the girls in the tent and, stayed up for a while, keeping an eye on things, and nothing else happened. And that was that. And in future conversations with my daughter, it took me maybe 2 months to get out of her that, yeah, this very well could have been what I've been talking about as a Sasquatch. That's really interesting, especially the pinecone part. I didn't want to allow it into I just didn't want to believe it at that point, Wes. It just seemed too crazy. I don't know. It's just one of those things. It's just unbelievable. But the more I thought about it, and after the second experience, I knew pretty much that, yeah, that's probably what it was. the pine cone, you know, it came right out. It didn't rattle down the Ponderosa and shoot out. I mean, and just the fact of how scared my daughter was after this happened, interesting.
Yeah, and a person in that situation doesn't really make sense either. You would have heard them. People are loud, you know what I mean? Even some of your best hunters out there, they're loud when they go through the forest, and you not hearing anything makes you wonder, you know, it really makes you wonder. A person just doesn't make sense, and it seems like your daughter, especially being 15, she would have said, hey, it's some guy messing around.
Yeah. It just didn't add up to me. The location, I mean, it was just a straight up shot to the mountains and nothing, no roads, no trails. So definitely a possibility that was another encounter.
Now, was it your dad that has kind of believed in Bigfoot?
Yeah. Like we talked earlier, and when I was young, we would discuss it, and maybe it was Cain, and there was one of them, and you know, he roamed the earth, and that was that. And then when I was a teenager, we ran into a track in a very remote area that very well could have been a Sasquatch print. It was quite large. It was a long time ago, so I've talked to my brother, I talked to my dad that were both there, and I said, yeah, that was what happened. I wanted to make sure that I remembered it correctly. And so, you know, we always thought there was a possibility. And then a couple of years ago, my dad and my mom were in the mountains in Idaho, and apparently late in the night they were screamed at and they both said it was the most horrific scream that they'd ever heard. That just never, there was nothing to compare it to. So that got my dad, you know, starting to research, starting to listen to these different calls and try to match something. And he said that he did. And before that time, my mom just laughed at this. And after that, and she's fairly convinced. And when I talk to him, because it's nice to be able to have someone to talk to when this happens to you, because you can't just tell anyone. And so I've talked to them at length about this, and they definitely sympathize. It was a long, scary night for me.
Yeah, I think it would be a long, scary night for just about anyone, to be honest with you. I think that'd scare most people. God, especially, I'm still thinking about it charging your tent.
That was definitely the apex of the night. Even though before that I'd seen this thing through the tent, the charge, I mean, I thought this thing's attacking. It's finally worked itself up and it's coming in.
Well, like I said, in those situations, it's probably, I think you did the right thing. Don't get out. Don't provoke it. I think with these things, in situations like that, and I'm just speculating on this, but I think in situations like that, these things aren't stupid, and they're not just going to randomly go after you. I think they're going to want to pick and choose their battles. I think it was more or less to try and scare you out of the area, and that's just me speculating.
You know what? I think you're right. I think, honestly, reflecting on it, we were camped right at the edge of this lake that the water had gone down enough that it had split into 3 different lakes now, and so we had shallow water with fish trapped. And in my mind, that was their dinner. It was an easy meal, and they come in, and there we were, wrecking their plans. Another thing that's interesting about that area is that people will write in the logbook about rock slides in the night, or you'll read online, the blogs about, someone's trip up there, and they always talk about the rock slides in the night. And that kind of made me wonder, is that because in this bowl, there's all of that It's a weird area. It's granite and low-grade marble mix, but there's a lot of just rock slide areas, and it kind of made me think that there might be these things moving around. And I noticed some caves up high, but I don't know.
Them coming down at night?
Yeah, exactly. And my dad, he keeps asking me, when are you going to go back? And I don't know. I guess I felt like these things were pretty aggressive. It was more than checking us out. They didn't want us there.
Yeah, I don't think it was curiosity at all. I think that what you experienced was very aggressive, and I think it was more or less to get you to leave. And I think that it could have easily escalated that night.
I'm really glad it didn't.
Yeah. Well, that goes to show that, that's to your credit that it didn't escalate, because, if you got a gun in your hand and something's messing with you and you feel like your life's in danger, it doesn't take much to pull a trigger and start firing.
No.
Especially if you're in fear for your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I was prepared. That thought had crossed my mind, when that thing started to charge. And, yeah.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing the encounter, Ben. It's a very interesting encounter. I'm sorry it's affected you the way it has. That's the way it generally goes, especially when you're in situations like this. You'll never forget it. You'll probably have many more sleepless nights. It gets better with time, but it'll eat away at you, because you'll get to a point to where you just want to know more and more and more. What did I run into? What did I experience? What did I, and I think part of that's human curiosity, but part of it is, you experience real terror.
Yeah, yeah.
Very few people in their life experience real terror, and that's real terror.
And that was unlike anything I've ever experienced. So definitely something that it's hard to let go of, and it definitely affects your future choices about what trips you want to do and how remote you want to go. And we've done, a lot of these 9-day backpacking trips to try to get as deep in as we can. The whole idea is to not see anyone and not have any four-wheeler trails or.
Yeah, well, be careful in the future, especially if you go deep down in the woods like you do, 7 miles in, and because you're kind of on your own in some of those. It's some lonely places when you go in like that, and you're kind of on your own in some of those places. I doubt you had cell phone service out there.
No.
So you're really, really on your own. But I'm glad you made it out okay, and I just can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the experience with the audience and sharing it with me. So thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate, what you're doing and having a place that people can come where they can share their accounts and not be judged or be labeled as crazy or, that type of thing. So I appreciate you.
Thanks, brother. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance to check out the website, sasquatchchronicles.com. Until next time, everyone, have a great night.